Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we are going to paint a beautiful lake scene using watercolors. So let's get started. I have taped down the paper on all sides using masking tape, and now we will begin with the sketch. I'm drawing the horizon line first, then marking the area for the land which is partially submerged in the water. Now around the horizon area, I'll sketch out the distant trees. Beyond that, I am adding a distant mountain with soft curvy shapes and marking some areas in the foreground for the river bank. And I'll also add a few vertical lines which we will later paint as the trees. Alright, that's it for the sketching. Next, I'll use a mop brush to apply clean water across the entire area, as we will use this for wet on wet technique. Next, let us mix the colors for painting the reflections. We'll need a bluish green shade, so I'm using a mix of teal and forest green for one color, and the other color is raw umber. So I'm going to apply these shades wet on wet across the water area, which will serve as the base layer. It doesn't need to be perfect at this point, so don't worry if the paint spreads a bit. Apply the raw umber around the mid section near the horizon, and then use the teal shade towards the foreground area. Make sure to leave some blank spaces to suggest the sky's reflection. For the second layer, we will use the same colors but in darker shades. To darken them, I'll mix Paynes grey and burnt umber to the teal mix, and for the brownish color that we have, I'll add burnt umber and a bit of violet. So we have two darker shades. Now apply this as a second layer, and as you apply, you will notice this is where we started creating the reflection of the trees that we will be painting next. I'll also add a darker tone of the blue reflections around the horizon. If you have seen the final painting, you will notice there are multiple layers in the water. So don't worry if the colors move around and you don't achieve the same results. It doesn't have to be an exact copy of mine. Play around with the colors and have fun. Watercolors have this tendency of drying lighter, so you don't see much of these layers in the final result. While this layer dries, let us move on to painting the sky. First, make sure the area above the horizon is still wet by brushing it with clean water. For the sky, I'll use a mix of ultramarine blue and Paynes grey for the darker clouds, and a lighter blue for the rest. Apply the lighter blue across the sky only on partial areas, leaving some white spaces for the clouds. Then use ultramarine blue and Paynes grey mix for the darker clouds, keeping some white areas to suggest light clouds. The shapes again don't need to match mine exactly, just apply the colors randomly. Next, for the mountain, I'll first apply a diluted Paynes grey for the base layer. Then I'll mix Paynes grey, green and a touch of brown to create a darker green shade for the second layer. When painting the mountain, I'll create a misty effect at the bottom. I'll apply some jagged brush strokes at the top to give it a rugged look, which suggests the trees in the distant area. You can layer the colors on distant mountain and keep the lower areas lighter to suggest mist. Moving on, let us paint the partly submerged land in the water. I'll use diluted burnt sienna for this area. Take around medium size brush. I'm using size 8 and paint the land completely with this color. Since the background is dry, we will be working with wet on dry technique. Next, let us paint the distant trees along the horizon line. I'm using Payne's gray and applying it with vertical brush strokes to suggest trees. Then with a clean brush, try to blend the two areas, that is the brown and the tree area. I'll further add some burnt sienna on this brown area to add a sense of depth. Once the basic shapes are in place, go back and refine the trees, adding more definition and details. You don't have to do it for all the trees, just 1 or 2 trees here and there would be enough. Next, I'll take a darker brown color and add in around the borders of this land area. This will add a shadowed effect on the land part. I'll use burnt sienna for the foreground area. Next, let us mix a darker color which we will use to paint the pine trees in the midground and background area. I'm mixing burnt umber and Payne's gray to create a dark shade. To start, I'll mark the trunk area to give us a guide on where the trees will be placed, and then I'll add the foliage. You can use a fine liner brush or the pointed tip of other brushes. Feel free to paint as many trees as you like. There is no set limit on the number of trees. Since the lower area of the distant part is still wet, the colors will create a blurry effect. Then I'll add some trees in the midground area. So just marking their placement. We will build up multiple layers on these later for more detail. Right now they are wet, so we won't be able to create that detailed effect. I'll also apply some darker color on the foreground part to create an uneven dimension in the area. Moving on, let us create some depth in the lake water using wet on wet technique. First, I'll apply clean water across the lake area so that we can go ahead with wet on wet. Now that the surface is wet, I'll mix a darker green color to paint the reflection of the trees. Adding some burnt sienna as well. I'll use darker brown color and apply it on the land area to define the area and make it more dimensional. Now the background tree area is dry, so I'll go back and add some detailed foliage on the trees. You can use Payne's gray or any darker color for painting the trees. And on the lower end of the trees, you could use your fingertip to smudge the sharp edges. In the foreground part, I am painting some grasses using darker brown color. At this stage, you can either stop here if you're happy with how the painting looks, or if you'd like to add more depth and movement, then you could follow along and add some ripples in the water. I'll be painting ripples using darker teal color to give a sense of movement in the water. So this part can be a little messy, but stick with it. It will come together beautifully in the end. So towards the background area, I'll add more lines because it is far from the viewpoint. Painting the ripples are very easy. You could simply apply some horizontal lines or some zigzag lines to depict the movement in the water. I'll also apply some darker lines along the sides with the intention of keeping the middle area glowing slightly, while the rest of the water has a deeper tone. In the background water part, I felt I added too many lines, so I'm softening them by wiping it with diluted color. Apply some quick brush strokes using a lighter tone color. Next, I'll intensify the midground trees with a darker color. Since they are closer and in the midground area, they'll appear much darker than the background trees. In the foreground area, I'm adding darker grasses. We are almost done. Now let's add some final touches to define the elements in the painting. And in the midground area, let's intensify the water using a teal color. I'm adding some grasses below the tree trunk to create a more organic look. And then some free flying birds in the sky. Splattering some paints in the foreground area for textured effect. Alright, now let us peel off the masking tape, revealing the final look of the painting. There you go, this is our final artwork, a beautiful lake painting using watercolors. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like as well. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Until then, happy painting.